Hello and welcome to Otter Creek in Rio Grande. I thought today that since I was kind of at a standstill on doing anything in the shop and anything in the model railroad room because of the shop, I would go ahead and do a tutorial on JMRI Operations. Alright, if you don't have JMRI already installed, I'm not going to try and walk you through that. There's lots of really good videos out there on YouTube that can get you through that process. And as I mentioned before, if you have Decoder Pro, you also have Panel Pro. I didn't see a need for me to make use of Panel Pro at all because I didn't have a panel. I didn't have any block detection. I didn't even have, one tortoise switch machine on my N-scale layout. So I completely ignored Panel Pro for probably 6 months to a year. So in your main menu here on Panel Pro, you go up to the Tools drop-down menu, and then down here you can see Operations. You've got Settings, which think of this as the preferences for Operations. Lots of different things that you can configure here, and we'll get to that in a minute. You have Locations, which the locations are the towns and or the spur tracks on your layout. Cars, pretty self-explanatory. Locomotives, which I'm not going to get into locomotives because unless you have a well-defined engine service area, you probably won't need locomotives to begin with anyway, because this gets pretty detailed where you can configure what type of locomotive you need, what kind of tonnage it takes to pull a train from point A to point B. I'm just not going to get into that with this tutorial. Then you have routes, which of course is how you get from location to location. And then you have trains, which is what you actually build to make use of the routes to get from location to location. So let's get started looking at the settings. This is the settings window. So it starts with the railroad name, of course. And I think just for lack of anything else, I'm going to call this Operations Video. Okay. Now you can see here, you have options to travel north, south, east, west, or both. I believe when I get the entire railroad completed, I will have a north-south option because the train travels from Basalt to Aspen, and that is a north-south direction. But for our purposes today, we're only going to deal with east and west. I believe HO is the default. My railroad's HO narrow gauge 3. Maximum train length. So this number should be set probably to your longest siding. I'm not going to mess with it right now because I don't have any siding, but I also don't have more than one train moving at any given point in time, so it'll never be an issue. Maximum locos per train, 6. That sounds like a good number, I guess. I'll probably never use 6 locomotives for one train. I could see me maybe using 2. Horsepower per ton. Again, this is going to be something that you'd use with the locomotives option. And I haven't messed with that much to know exactly how all that works, but I believe the program defines how much tonnage exists depending on the length of train. Switch time, 3 minutes. I imagine, and I haven't messed with this, but if you have an X number moves at any one given location, and we'll just say 10. So you have 10 moves at a location. This is going to figure that those 10 moves is probably going to take 30 minutes to make 10 moves, because each switch time, it takes about 3 minutes. That's a guess because I've never messed with that before, but it's going to be something like that. Travel time 4, I gather that this is probably from one location to the next. This is going to be an average kind of thing where you probably, if you have multiple locations on your layout, what's the average time it takes to get from any one location to a next location. Car types, you've got the choice between descriptive and the AAR codes. Unless you're a real railroad enthusiast, you probably won't recognize the AAR codes. I go descriptive. A box car is a box car. Unit length, here in the United States, we use feet. Somewhere across the pond, you'd probably use meters. Optional year modeled. I haven't ever done this before, but what the heck? We'll put in 1930 and see what happens. Create train icons on panel. Use panel name. I haven't experienced this yet. I do have panels now, but that probably goes beyond this video. And again, this has to do with more of what you see on panels. Append loco number and or enable icon. I'm not going to mess with that. And then also your icon colors. If you're actually running a dispatcher, I believe if you've got all of your block detection, I believe you can track in real time with icons where a current train is on your panels. So eastbound train in this case would be blue, westbound would be green. If you have a switcher moving somewhere, that would be yellow. And then if a train is currently terminated, it would show in red. The first thing I would suggest you do is right here under options where it says add operations menu to main menu. You hit save. And then when you close out of that and then quit and then start again, it should pull up right here under your main pull down area. So now you've got all of these pull downs that I just discussed. All right, now there's, if we're starting from scratch, which is what I'm doing here, I've got nothing entered in any of this. My suggestion is you either start with locations or cars. It probably doesn't matter much, but when you actually put your cars in, one of the options is where is the car? So if you don't have a location to put the car at, you're going to end up having to come back and reset the car somewhere else. Kind of an extra step that you might not need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and start with locations. All right. All right. You can see we've got no locations here. Now I've got the time saver. And so I already know where all my locations are on the time saver. And when thinking of locations, you need at least a point A and a point B and probably something in between. On this particular layout, how I'm going to do that is I'm going to have staging at either end of the time saver. So I'm going to add my first location. I'm going to call this Leadville. Leadville doesn't actually exist right now on the main layout because I haven't built it yet. So the first thing you do is you're going to give it a location And then you hit this add location button down here, and boom, Leadville now exists. You've got this location is serviced by trains traveling east and west. And that is accurate. And then you've got this select the rolling stock service by location. Okay, so this is everything that comes by default in the program as the type of cars, and or you've also got engines, diesel, gas turbine, steam, that kind of thing. You've got all of that. As a general rule, I leave all of that checked when I start with a major location. Okay, so Leadville now exists. It services trains going both east and west, and it services all of this equipment. Now, tracks at this location. Now you've got several options here. You've got spurs, yards, classification interchange, and staging only. So for my railroad as it exists now, Leadville is only going to be staging. And in full disclosure, they kind of tell you that to begin with, you probably don't want to mess with staging tracks because they're a little more complicated than the others, and I think that is an accurate statement. But for the way I'm doing things on this railroad, I really don't have too many other options. So you're going to get a peek into staging and how that works from the get-go. So it's staging only. So these are kind of either ors. You know, I can't have both classification and staging, at least not at this location. So I'm going to add a staging track. And you can name these anything you want. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to call this Leadville Staging 1. Pretty simple. Now, here we've got the length of the track. If you know the scale feet of the length of track, you can go ahead and just type that in. If you don't know the scale length of the track, then you can type in the actual length of the track. So in my case, I'm going to make use of 54 inches of track on the layout that will serve as Leadville Staging 1. Okay, you've got that typed in. Now you're going to add staging. So now Leadville Staging 1 exists within Leadville. And again, you have all of these options as to what kind of cars does Leadville Staging 1 service. You also have the option of does Leadville Staging 1 service trains going both east and west. And the answer is yes, it does. It kind of has to in this case. And again, with staging yards, you want staging yards to be as inclusive as you can get them to be. So everything that exists here, I want them. Then you've got some other options. Track accepts all roads. Yes, and I've only got one road on this railroad, so this is going to be pretty much default. Select trains or routes for arrivals, select trains and routes for departures. You can discriminate between what trains can arrive and depart from this particular staging track. I'm not going to mess with that. And again, your best bet is to make things as global as possible to begin with so that you're not making the program think too much. That's probably the best way to describe that. All right, so I'm going to save that staging track. It's saved, and now you can see Leadville now exists. It has one staging track, and it has 391 scale feet of track, which is 54 inches in real life. I've used none of that length of track. I've got none of it reserved. And then the moves and the cars and the locos, I have not got into that to know exactly how all that works, but there it is. That's Leadville. I'm going to save that location, and Leadville now exists. All right. Now we need another location, and this is going to be Grand Junction. Grand Junction now exists, and again, it will be serviced by both an east-west trains and make use of all this equipment. Grand Junction will also be staging only. And this is going to be pretty much a repeat of everything we just did at Leadville. Grand Junction 1. Now, on this particular railroad, these are actually the exact same location. And you can get away with that as long as you never try and have the same equipment, or excuse me, different equipment in the same location at the same time. So the way it's going to work on my railroad is I depart from Leadville. We'll go through what I'm going to call Malta and then terminate at Grand Junction. All right, so we will save that. And you can see Grand Junction now exists with the exact same parameters as Leadville. We'll save that location. And now we have two major locations on the railroad, Grand Junction staging and Leadville staging. So we need one more location, and that is what I'm going to call Malta. Now, again, because Malta is the major location, it's the town along what eventually will be a route, I'm going to keep all of this, because, to kind of explain that, let's say I don't want any tank oil cars to ever go through the town of Malta. That could be a true statement, that there's no facility at Malta that would take a tank oil truck or tank oil car. If you discriminate against that, you could end up with a build failure as a result of having this type of car that would be going through Malta. So it won't build the train because you've got an oil tanker, and Malta won't accept oil tankers. So again, be as inclusive as possible for your main locations. So what do we have at Malta? Do we have spurs? Do we have yards, classification interchanges, or staging yards? Well, I want spurs, because Malta is going to be where all of my locations are that accepts and or delivers loads and cars. So I want a spur track. All right, my first spur track is going to be what I'm going to call Sperry Farms. And I've already kind of measured everything, and I know that at Sperry Farms, I've got about 12 inches of usable track. And again, Sperry Farms will receive traffic from either east or west. Now, because Sperry Farms is it's a cattle pens, there's no reason to ever receive a steam train as a load into Sperry Farms. So I don't need steam trains as a load going to Sperry Farms. Really, all Sperry Farms probably will ever receive would be stock cars, maybe the occasional box car for supplies, and a flat car, things along those lines. A passenger car would never go to Sperry Farms. So I find the easiest way to deal with this is to clear all and then go through and figure out what kind of car do I actually want to ever see at Sperry Farms. Well, box car, not going to receive a caboose. I definitely could see a flat car maybe showing up with, some equipment that maybe they need. Let's see what else. Don't want any gondolas. Of course, where's my stock car? These are in alphabetical order from left to right, down the bottom row by row. So stock, flat, box. Anything else I can think of might stop there. I think that's probably good. It's going to accept all roads. Again, this is pretty inclusive of everything. So we're discriminating against all cars except box cars, stock cars, and flat cars. So we will never generate traffic from a vegetable tank car to Sperry Farms. Okay, you can now see Sperry Farms exists in the town of Malta, and there's 87 feet of usable track there. There's nothing currently at it. I'm going to save this location. All right, I'm going to do a few more of these. That way I'm not boring you with all of this. I'll finish the rest of my spur tracks here at Malta and then come back and show you what I've done after I've finished. All right, I've completed Malta, and I thought just for maybe a little reference, I would go ahead and show my track plan for the area that we're working with. So what you see as both Leadville and Grand Junction is this length of track from here to about right here. So that is working as my staging track. And then Malta, of course, is everything else on this particular track plan. So we go into Malta, and once you've created the actual location itself, to get back to your individual spurs and yards and whatnot, you go into the edit location. And now you can see in the town of Malta, I've got all of these added spur tracks. And I probably didn't make it very clear. If Malta were a larger city and had more to it than just what you've already seen, you can go in and add a yard track in similar fashion. Yard 1, 220 feet of track, and then you have a yard track. You'd save that. And now you're dealing with your yard tracks in Malta. And then you do the same thing with classification interchange, add classification interchange. And then you don't have the option of adding staging if you've got any of these other things already made. So that's that. Let me go back to yards. I don't actually have a yard in Malta, so I'm going to delete that and go back to my spurs. Okay, so and the way I think of this is you can have more than one spur at the same location. So you can see both bucket coal. I've got a loading spur and a receiving spur. So this area right here, this is my bucket coal, and this length of track right here is what I call loading. And really the only reason that I'm doing this now is just to generate more traffic on the layout so that there's more options for cars to go from point A to point B. Once I have the larger layout going, I may not make use of this for loading. This may just be another process that a train actually goes to and receives coal into the tender. This back track here, this is the receiving. So typically a gondola will come back here, they shovel it out of the back of the gondola into here, and then for whatever reason, if another car needs coal, then it will come from the inside of the building to coal here. So that's bucket coal. So there's two spurs associated with that one industry. I've also got a house track, which is this length of track right in here. And I don't actually have Leyland Son. I mean, I guess this is Leyland Son, but there's another building here that I've never added to the actual track plan that's Leyland Son. So I'm calling this area in between the station and kind of back here, back behind the water tower and the Leyland Son building proper. I'm calling that the house track. And then this trackage here is actual Leyland Son trackage. Sperry Farms is this length of track from bucket coal to the end of the layout in that area. And then Sunday's General Store, which is this building here, named after my wife's family and my wife. And then United Farmers Co-op is this building right here. So I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can see they're all similar fashion where I've got designated which cars will actually go. I've got a tank oil car that I want to go somewhere occasionally, so I figure Farmers Co-op might have some external tanks that people could come and purchase fuel oil from. I think I also have one going to bucket coal occasionally. Again, I'm trying to generate as much traffic as I can with the cars that I've got on the layout. Now, there's another feature with locations that you might want to make use of. This is a little advanced. It kind of goes maybe beyond the beginner version, but as mentioned before, this length of track here is a shared track between both Sperry Farms and bucket coal. So we can do what's called a track pool. So bucket coal, if you go into that and you've got that particular spur pulled up, then you go up here to your tools menu and you can see track pools. Okay. And I've already done this previously just to kind of make sure I remembered the process, but I've got a track pool that I've already named Sperry Bucket because that's the length of track that those two industries share. Okay. I've got a minimum track length, which is 34 feet. That's the minimum amount of track that I want to, I guess, not share with one industry or the other. When you hit save, it's going to tell you that the minimum amount of trackage that I need for, in this case, bucket coal is 34 feet. Okay, I'm going to save that. Now we go to Sperry Farms and we'll do the same thing. Tools, track pools. I'm going to add that, hit save, and now you can see I've got a total length of 174 feet that's shared between both of the industries. The maximum length that any one industry will make use of is 87 feet. And then the minimum length is 34 feet. Now, if I've done my math right, that means that I should be able to get 3 cars at either of these industries, where before I could have only gotten 2 cars. And so, and again, this is another process that you should probably know about. When you go up here and you've got your track pool here, if you go to your help window and then click on window help, it will give you all of this information about track pools. And then you can read this and kind of understand how it's supposed to work. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go with it and kind of hope that you understand what's going on here, so that, you know, we're sharing this amount of trackage between both of these industries, and you might get 3 cars going to Bucket Coal, 1 car going to Sperry Farms, or vice versa, instead of only ever having an option of 2 cars going to each. All right, so that's where we're at on locations. I think that should get you going where you're going there. And we'll get into the cars next, which is real simple. But that's where I'm going to begin next. Let's add some cars to the railroad. All right, so again, we're going to go up to our Operations tab, go to the Cars menu, and then you can see right down here I have got 0 cars, and so I want to add a car. And then you're going to get this window here. Most of this is going to be real self-explanatory. What is the road? Now, what I've done is I went ahead, since all of my cars are already on my layout, I went ahead and took a picture of all of them so that I could very easily look at them and add them and not have to put on my magnifiers and figure out what everything was. So I may even add some pictures in here as we go, so you can see what I'm adding onto it. So the first thing is the road. And the very first one that I'm going to add, if I can find it on here, is a Denver and Rio Grande Western. The road number happens to be 54. And in this case, it is a reefer. Okay, so I've got that much of it. Now you've got these other little boxes down here. This is for another level of complication, I guess you'd say. The only thing that I've messed with on this is the caboose. If you check caboose, then you're basically saying that this type of vehicle here, type of car, if you know, just for the sake of argument, this was a caboose, then you're telling the program that this is a legitimate concern for the program to look into to build. One of the options you can have is to enable a train not to leave a yard unless it has a caboose. So if this particular caboose here happened to be number 54, was on a caboose track and was available, then this might be one of the cabooses, or caboose, that the program would tell you to go pick up before you could leave. Again, we don't have caboose tracks on the time saver, so we're not going to mess with it. But that is what that's all about. The same thing would exist with the end of train light, and so on and so forth. What am I'm looking for reefer. There it is. Okay. Now, you can see that I've got 3 different locations to choose from as to where to place this particular car. Because I took pictures and I know exactly where it's at, I know that this car is currently in my Leadville staging 1. And naturally, if you had a lot more areas within the town of Leadville, that would populate in this drop-down window. If you had staging 2, spurs, yard tracks, classification tracks, all of that would be available as an option as to where to place the car. Now, this particular car, I kind of skipped the link. This particular car is actually 23 feet according to what's written on the box and the side of the car. I believe it's 23 feet, 10 inches. I'm not going to mess with the extra 10 inches. There's a couple different ways you could do. You could call it 24 feet, or I believe the recommended practice per JMRI is to add 4 feet for the coupler length of the car itself. So you can see my drop-down window. Whoops. My drop-down window here doesn't have 23 as an option. So we're going to go here. We're going to add 23. Add. And we should close that. And 23 is now an option. And then what color is the car? You can see now that I've got 23, the weight will actually auto-populate. And it's telling you that this vehicle is 38 tons when loaded, I believe is how that works. So again, the computer will actually calculate if you've got, a 12-car train, it's going to calculate the tonnage of that train. And if you enable the locomotive feature, if you don't have a locomotive that can pull the tonnage of that train, then it might require a second locomotive. That's kind of how that works. Here we go with the color. This one happens to be bright yellow, brand new out of the box and not weathered yet. And then you have the option, is this loaded or unloaded? Well, I guess we'll just go ahead and say it's loaded since it's in staging and it's on its way somewhere. Kernel. So if you're familiar with what a kernel is, it's a number of cars that are hooked together that stays together and travels from destination to destination. Unit trains like coal trains and things like that. I've worked it out to where I've had 6 coal cars that are always the part of the same kernel. Won't mess with that with what I've got going on now. Built and owner, none of that's there. Again, if you have a specific industry that owns a car, that's something that you can add for however you want to make it work out for you. All right, so now we're completed with all of our editing. We're going to add the car. And you can see now up here in this window that we now have Denver and Rio Grande Western Reefer 54 as being located currently in Leadville. I'm not going to do all these cars, but I will do one more just to kind of show you how you can do multiples. Let me get my picture back up, because I've got another one of these that's just the exact same car. The only difference is going to be the number. And I'm trying to find the number now. It's number 36. So you can see all of this information remains the same. All I'm going to do right here is go in, make that number 36, and then hit add car. And now you can see number 36 exists with all the same parameters. And that makes, if you've got multiple of the same type of car, like box cars or whatnot, then it makes it a little easier to enter. So I'm going to enter the rest of my cars and come back after I've got that finished. I've got all the cars entered, and you can see up here you've got this row here where you can discriminate by numerical order, road order, alphabetical order by car type, length, and of course location. So you can see now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cars in Leadville staging 1. I've got 2 cars at Bucket Coal, 2 in loading and 1 in receiving. And then I've got 2 box cars at the house track, both of which are box cars. Then I've got a flat car at Leyland Sons. And I've got a stock car at Sperry Farms and a flat car at Malta. And I think I want to go ahead and edit the rest of these that are in Malta, because I kind of forgot to pay attention as I was adding them. I want these all to be empty. So this box car at Malta house track, I'm going to go down here and change that to empty. And if I didn't mention this, you've got add car and you've got save car. I'm editing the car, so if I accidentally hit add, I don't think it'll let me, because it won't let you have the same car number more than once, I don't think. But if you accidentally hit the save car when you're trying to add a car, it will change all the information of whatever car you have pulled up. So now that car is now currently empty, and I want this one to also be empty, and this car I want to be empty. The way spur tracks work, once a car has been set out at a spur, it automatically changes its load from loaded to empty. And I'm not sure about yard tracks, classification tracks. I'm pretty sure classification tracks and interchange tracks do not. Staging tracks, I don't think will change the loaded from empty. I'd have to look that information back up again. But it's just kind of something to be aware of. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars in the town of Malta, and then the other 10, I believe, are all in Leadville. 15 cars is a pretty good number of cars for my particular layout. I might be able to get away with 3 to 5 more. I think I probably could. It would just kind of make it a little more difficult probably to switch. So those are my cars. And now we'll move on to routes and trains. Let's talk about routes. Routes are how you get from point A to point B. So on this particular layout, you're going to have to get from Leadville to Grand Junction. Leadville being the departure location, and Grand Junction being the place that you terminate the train, or at least that's how I'm going to go about doing it. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to add a route. And this block here is, what do we want to call the route? I'm going to call this, we'll call it the Malta Local. And then you've got this comment section, and I'm just going to put local moves, moves at Malta. And you can put anything in here. There's a minimum amount of, a maximum number of characters you can put in. But just whatever kind of helps you remember what the train's supposed to do. If you get a bunch of different trains going on, it gets a little convoluted as to remember what the train's supposed to be doing. So that's the route, the Malta local. I'm going to hit the add route button. Still don't have any locations. So in this drop-down menu, you're going to see every location that you have available that you've created. I'm going to start with my route in Leadville. These buttons here, if you've already got locations up here and you're editing the route, you have the option of either putting your new location at the top, the middle, or the bottom. This is going to be at the top, which it would be anyway because there's nothing else there. You're going to add the location, and then you either have a departure time or a wait time. I haven't messed with this, and I think this becomes maybe relevant if you've got more than one operator where, something needs to occur before you can begin your process. I generally go with the departure time instead of wait. At least I think that's what I do. It's been a while since I've set one of these up. And then I also am, once you leave Leadville, the next one you're going to add is going to be the next location that it goes. Now, if I keep this marked as top, it's going to go on top of Leadville. So now I want this to be on the bottom. Malta is the next location. Add that location. And then Grand Junction is the next location. So our route goes from Leadville through Malta to Grand Junction. That's about as simple as it gets. A departure, a work location, and then a terminating location. Now, it just so happens I am traveling east from Leadville to Malta to Grand Junction. Moves. Moves is a way of saying how many cars are you wanting to either depart with or arrive with or set out or pick up. So leaving Leadville, this number 50 says I want 50 cars to leave Leadville. This number says I want to pick up and set out, any combination of picking up and setting out, 5 cars, and then I want to arrive at Grand Junction with 50 cars. Well, I've only got 15 cars, so I'm going to be safe that, there's not more than 50 cars in my staging yard that this might fail to build because it's telling me to leave cars in staging, and you can't do that. Same thing here, where if you've got 55 cars on your train, you will not be able to enter Grand Junction. So what I typically do, at least in the way that this layout is running, is I'll go ahead and go in here, and since I know right now, at least I think I remember, I've got exactly 10 cars in staging. Okay, 5 cars in Malta to pick up or set out. That's a reasonable number. And then this number, I don't want to end up with 50 cars there. What can happen is if you're requesting way too many cars to end up in Grand Junction, it might skip over Malta completely and say, well, gosh, we need as many cars as possible in Grand Junction, and you might not pick up any, or you might only pick up cars at Malta, and you won't set any out. So I try to go with more of a reasonable number. We'll go with 6. So I want to end in Grand Junction with 6. So you can see 10, 15, and 6 cars here. That should have me leaving some cars at Malta and maybe picking up fewer than I leave. Random. I've got random set off, and I would probably suggest that that's what you do to begin with. So of these 10 cars, it's asking of the number 10, you can randomize how many of that 10 it routinely picks up. If you do the 100, it's going to request, I believe, that all 100 get picked up every time, and you could end up with a build fail. 10% means that randomly 10% of the cars either will not be picked up, I believe is the way that works. 10% won't get picked up, 20% won't get picked up. There's some random function of whether or not all 10 of those moves occur, and the higher the percentage number, the greater the chance that will happen is the way I understand that. Set outs, this doesn't really apply to staging very much. I just leave those alone. Yes and yes. When you get to Malta, yes, you want pickups. Yes, you want set outs. You can change that. If you only want to pick up or only want to set out, you can swap those around. Same thing here. I always leave that for yes and yes for your staging. So that's our one and only route at the moment. So we're going to save that, and we'll see what happens after we talk about trains. All right. Another thing I forgot to mention, once our train terminates in Grand Junction, there has to be a route to get it back to Leadville. And you can do this a couple different ways. I generally, what I've done with this layout thus far is just do what I call a return move or a spin train or something like that. I will call this route return to Leadville. Comments, I'm just going to spin the train around. Again, I'm going to start this time in Grand Junction. And instead of going through Malta, and the main reason I do it this way is because I can't actually turn the train around because I've just got 8 foot of track. So my locomotive literally is always facing west. It really wouldn't matter. I could add Malta and do the same train again in the reverse direction, but I just generally do it this way. I'm going to go from Grand Junction to Leadville, and this time I'm going west. Now, I forgot to mention in the previous segment that the train direction is as you're leaving the station, you're going west. You're leaving Grand Junction heading west. You're leaving Leadville heading west. Excuse me, these should be east. Grand Junction to Leadville is east. Sometimes I forget. All right, and then 50 and 50, I've got a total of 15 cars. So once again, I always want to be able to accept all 15 of my cars just in case the computer generates a 15-car train. If you always want it to be able to generate what you actually have for your staging. All right, that route is complete. So now I've got 2 routes. I've got the Malta local and the return to Leadville. All right, let's create a train or two. All right, here's our trains window. If we had trains, they would populate up here. You can see I want to show the icon or the heading based on the time, not the ID. To be honest, I've never messed with the ID. I've only ever done time, so I can't talk too much about that. These options here, I generally just leave them all checked. If you get a bunch of different trains, you might benefit from taking that off, because then it'll only show the trains that ready to be built or can be built if they're selected. Messages, you know, this is going to show a message when a problem occurs. But generally when a problem occurs, I generally go into my build reports, which I always keep that checked, and you can figure out what's going on. And we'll get into that in a minute, because I'm sure we'll get a build fail probably the first time we try and build a train. These actions over here, you can, when this is pressed, when this button is pressed, you can begin moving the train. I've never messed with a conductor. I haven't found a need to even look that up yet in the menu. I haven't messed with terminate either. So again, I can't really talk about that. I think if you have a train selected in the window, you can terminate it. But I prefer terminating the train because I've moved it to its terminal rather than, you know, doing it that way. And then you can also reset your build if you get a build that maybe doesn't suit what you're trying to accomplish. And I'll get more into this as we go. If you have all the trains selected and you hit this build button, it will build every train that's ready to build. I think the same thing with this. Any train that's already built, it'll preview what it's going to take place. Switch lists is a way of getting what the train's going to do. You can actually print these, and you have a couple different printing options. I probably won't get into that on this video. And then again, you can terminate, I believe, all of your selected trains with this button here. All right, so let's actually create a train. The first one, of course, will be Malta Local. I find it's best to create a name that's associated with the route that the train takes. In this case, calling it the Malta Local is about as easy as it gets, because that's exactly, I think, what we named the route. Freight service to Malta. Departure time. Whatever you do here will determine how it populates here. So we'll start this train at 7 o'clock in the morning. And now the train has been created, and we've got a few more options here. You can see that this particular train makes use of every type of car there is, and that's the way I would suggest to always keep it, unless you have a need to do something different. All of the locomotive type service by this train is also checked. If you were running the transition era where you might have diesel and steam, you might uncheck everything but diesel and steam. Now down here, you can see we've got 0 locos checked, and that's because we're not messing with the locomotive tab at all. If I did put 1 locomotive, then you could see I've got a drop down here. I can request specific locomotive types, and there's not near as many of these to choose from. You'd have to enter in and create. I think this actually also works off of your roster, if you've done anything in your locomotives tab, there's some different options here maybe that we're not seeing now. Again, there was no K27 at all in here anywhere, and I think that's just because I haven't added it anywhere. But we're not going to mess with that, so no need to overcomplicate things. Again, we've requested no end of light train, end of the train light, and no caboose and no specific road. So this train should be ready to go. Oh, look, we didn't specify a route. You can't save it without a route. So we are choosing the Malta local. Another thing that's kind of handy about this, from this window, when you choose the route, if you hit edit, it will bring up the edit route window. So you can see, oh, okay, I'm going to leave from Leadville. I've requested 10 cars leaving Leadville. I've requested a combination of 5 pickups and setups at Malta, and I've requested that I terminate in Grand Junction with 6 cars. Yeah, that's the route I want. Save the train. And there we go. We now have a Malta local train ready to be built. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get our turnaround train. Return to Leadville. Spin train. All right, and this one will take place after the other one. We'll say all in all it takes about that long. Add train. Again, no real need to take any action of any of this down here. We need the return to Leadville route because that's what we're going to do, and then that train should be ready to be saved. All right, now we have 2 trains. Once you've got your trains, the only other thing left to do is see if you can actually build the train. So we'll go ahead and give this a shot and see what happens. Hey, we got lucky. We actually got a build on our first train. And I'll go ahead and point this out real quick. Because we've got build reports checked, I think this will pop up every time, even though we probably don't need it. So here's a preview of our manifest. You can see this is the scheduled work at Leadville. We're departing at 0700. We're picking up these trains, which should be everything we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is correct. I believe that's how many we had. Then when we get to Malta, we're going to pick up from the house track this Denver South Park and Pacific Railroad 1029. We're going to pick up Denver and Rio Grande 5500, and then we're going to set out these 3 tracks here, or these 3 cars here. One's going to Bucket Coal Receiving, one's going to Sperry Farms, one's going to Sunday's General Store. And then when we get to Grand Junction, we're going to set out everything. I really wasn't expecting it to build for the first time. So there's a good example of what we can do. I think I do want to do one more thing, just to kind of show you around a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now I've got this set to move. If I were to push this button, and I'll go ahead and do it, now it shows the current location to be Malta of the train. Okay, so you do your work in Malta, then you move again. Now you're in Grand Junction. If I hit the terminate button, then we'll actually terminate the train. And then all of your cars will show to be in a different location when you pull up your car window. Right now, because we haven't terminated, I believe it will still show everything. Well, I guess it does show some stuff in Grand Junction. It's showing it in transition with a destination of Grand Junction. So if you don't want to actually do that yet, then you can hit your reset button and it will reset everything back to here. And then you can hit preview and it will show you what you're going to do. If you've got this set to reset, instead of this button up here being build, I believe it will be preview. Okay. I'm going to show you one more thing with locations, just to kind of mess around just a little bit and show you another option that I do make use of, even on a small layout like what I've got going on right now. All right, one more thing that I do want to see if I can't illustrate. Right now, when we build this train, it just randomly does your pickups and your setouts. I think the pickups will always be first and then your setouts. And that's fine. And you probably don't even need to necessarily mess with this next thing I'm going to discuss. But if you've wanting to do just a little bit more, then this is another option. And when you're kind of fiddling with the program, if you have either a MacBook that has multiple different screens you can go to, or if you're lucky enough to maybe have a dual monitor system, I like to have my trains and routes on one screen and then my locations and cars on the other, because they're kind of work in sympathy with each other. So with locations, you're going to go into Malta, you're going to edit Malta, and here's all of your spurs. As a matter of fact, you can see that because this is a switching layout, there's kind of a preferred way that you handle business within the town of Malta. The program does not know how you actually switch anything unless it's really cut and dry and you're going west and you've got a trailing point. That part of it's kind of easy. If you're just switching out a industry on the road and you're dealing with a trailing point, or you've got a siding that you can deal with a facing point. So the way I like to work this layout, since I've done quite a bit of it now that I've had it for a while, is I prefer to switch out Sperry Farms first, then bucket coal loading, then I like to switch out bucket coal receiving, then what I'm calling Sunday General Store, then the co-op, then as a facing point, I will do Lael & Sons, then the house track. That's kind of what I found to make the easiest way to deal with the switching problem. I do things in those order. So if you actually had a build track in your yard at Leadville, you would probably block your cars in an order that helps facilitate those moves. So what you can do is, in the program, you pull up your Malta edit screen, and you go up here into Tools, and you see Track Blocking Order. And then if you read here, it says lower order tracks serviced first for westbound and northbound trains. Highest order tracks serviced first for eastbound and southbound trains. So here's all my locations. So since I have the knowledge of how I like to switch them, I want my lowest number to be Sperry Farms. So Sperry Farm would be a 1. Okay, then Bucket Coal Loading would be a 2. And really, I think the easier way to do this is probably this. Where's Sperry Farms? You hit up for Sperry Farms and you can see that it moved from here to there. And then you move up again, up again, up again, up again, up again. Now I've got Sperry Farms as my lowest order because my train is traveling westbound. Bucket Coal Loading will be my next one. Bucket Coal Loading. Then Bucket Coal Receiving is correct. Then I want Sunday General Store. It gets a little confusing. Okay, after Bucket Coal, then I want the Co-op. Then I want Lyle & Son, 6. And then House Track last is 7. So when the train actually builds in Leadville, it should build in this order so that when you're ferrying your cars around, you're doing your switching in the yard, you'll know what order to put them in before you ever get here. So we've saved that. And let's go back and reset this and see if we get something slightly different when we build it this time. Well, imagine that. We didn't get anything different. And we might not until we've done a few other things differently. And again, sometimes that works really well and sometimes it doesn't. Because again, the program doesn't know that you need to run around the train to deal with something from a trailing point that you've turned into a trailing point because you've run around the train, so on and so forth. But sometimes it does work and makes things just a little bit easier when you're leaving the yard, if you have a yard to actually build a train in. All right, one thing that I forgot to point out, and again, when you're trying to think about what it is you're trying to say before you say it, sometimes you just kind of brain freeze and forget a few things. If you've got the move button pressed and you move the train up here, you're committed to that and there's no going back. So my suggestion is to always have the reset button pressed. You can then preview the train, decide if that's really what you want to go with, and if it is, then you can hit your move button and then start your move. Because once you start moving, you pretty much have to continue with the move because you can't then reset the train. Because it'll say right here, train is en route to Grand Junction. I can't reset it because the train's already left the station. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move and terminate this train. And you can see now the train terminated in Grand Junction. So now we can actually build the Grand Junction train. And there it is. Should be everything that we went with. And I'm going to hit my reset just because we can preview it, kind of show what that's like. And we can go ahead and move this one as well. We can move it back to Leadville. Terminate. Now, if we actually pull up our cars, we can now see that if we cross-reference these to where what we started with and what we ended with, you're going to see things are now different. I did not actually move these on the layout, of course, because you just saw me do it in real quick time. I've got one more thing that I want to show you as an option that we can do maybe to help things work out a little bit different. We're going to edit our route for the Malta route. One of the things we can do is we can go through Malta twice. Kind of, I don't know if cheating is the right way to say that, but we've added Malta again. So I'm going to move Malta up. I'm going to have east and west. So now I've asked for a combination of 10 moves at Malta. Again, I don't want any randoms. Those should already be set to off. And as we move east, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trailing point locations, 5 trailing point spurs. So I want to only, let's just say, just for fun, let's go only pickups, no set outs as we move east. As we move west, let's go no pickups and set outs. So they're kind of catty corner from each other, so to speak. And I think that will generate a little different traffic as we go through. I've requested a total of 10 moves. We're going to leave these parameters the same. Let's see. How many cars do we actually have in... Get confused. See how many cars we actually have on staging 1. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6. So I'm going to leave with 6 and terminate with 6. I think that sounds good. Save route. Okay. Because another thing that I kind of want to do is see if we can't accidentally generate a build fail. Okay. So let's build this train and see what we get. Yep, it didn't fail. All right, we're picking up bucket coal, then Leyland Son, and that does work with our blocking as we changed. Then we're going to go Sperry Farms and bucket coal loading. So as we come in here with our set outs, we're coming in with 2 set outs. And they are in the correct order that we blocked them. So if we've done our blocking correctly and we've got 5723, which should be the closest, if I understand right, this up here, this first one, that will be what's connected to your actual locomotive. Okay, then the next one, 9206, is the bucket coal loading. 9226 is then the next one. So our blocking did work correctly. This was stacked as we built the train to facilitate setting out these two cars first, because your set outs in this case are going to happen before your pickups. And then you're going to pick up bucket coal loading. Again, bucket coal loading is here, which takes place before Lale and Son, which is your next to last. And since there were no moves for the house track, then that works out pretty good. So I think that worked good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to return all of the cars to where they were from the beginning, since we did move the train one time, and we'll see how it goes. I lied. There's one more thing that I want to do before we actually move any train cars, and that's do something that will maybe create a build fail. So if I were to build this train right now, I don't think there'd be any issues, and it would build. As a matter of fact, yeah, it builds without any problems. I got 4 pickups and 2 set outs in the town of Malta, and I'm arriving in Grand Junction with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cars, which is exactly what we've requested it to do, pretty much. We didn't get all of this. We didn't get 10 moves at Malta, but we did end up in Grand Junction. I think it always puts a emphasis on the amount of cars, at least with staging, that you actually terminate with. Okay, we'll reset it. Now, if you request more cars than what you have already in staging, there's not going to be an issue. I think I can request 50 and it will still build. Yeah, we got the 6 that are there, but you will see up here it says partial. I've got 10 of 34 cars. Okay. We'll reset that. Now, if I go in here and let's say I want to take 4 cars on this train. Build fail. Could not find a departing staging track at Leadville that meets the train requirements. And if you're trying to learn this all by your lonesome, that doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to you. But you do have this report up here. You can read the report. Let's see. What does it say? Train requirements. Train does not require any locomotives. That's not a problem because we didn't require any specific locomotives. Could not find a departing staging track at Leadville that meets the train requirements. Build failed for train at Malta. Okay, so this is pretty simple, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot. One of the things that you can do is you can come up here into Tools, and it says Build Report Options. We've got it set to minimal. Let's go to Very Detailed. And look at the report again. All right, we got a little more information. And some of this stuff is just general information. Our detail level is normal. Our report detail level is detailed, yada, yada, yada. We come down here. It says train will depart staging. There are 1 track. Staging tracks at Leadville, staging 1 has 0 locomotives and 6 cars. So it's telling you there's no locomotives and 6 cars. Staging track at Leadville has more cars, 6, than requested by train's route, 4. So the route is requesting 4. The staging track has 6. You cannot leave cars in a staging. That's kind of one of the little quirks about staging is you have to take the entire train out of staging. There has to be a destination for each car, either along the route or at your destination staging yard. So I just wanted to show, there's more things than you could ever cover concerning build fails that you could discuss. But generally speaking, it's going to have something to do with the length of tracks, especially if you're talking about staging. It's going to have to do with whether or not there's a destination for every car you've got. And you just have to read those build reports real close and figure out what's going on so that you can fix the problem. Generally, I just mess with these numbers until it works. It's not very scientific, but that's the way I've learned, is just to mess with all these things. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to reset all my cars to what we began with, and then we're going to run some train.